From VOA Learning English, this is the Economics Report. The South African Department of Labor reported last month that the nation has too few jobs for unskilled laborers. The department also said there are not enough workers for highly skilled positions. The sharp differences between jobs and skills were apparent recently when officials advertised a job opening in the government. The position was that of Auditor General or Chief Financial Supervisor. With a 26% unemployment rate nationwide, there was no shortage of interest in the job. 90 people asked to be considered, but officials said many of them lacked the necessary skills or education. The Auditor General is responsible for supervising and independently examining South Africa's finances. The advertisement said the position required the person to be a trained accountant, but many unqualified people applied. The Labor Department report blamed the nation's poor education system. But for unskilled workers, the story is very different. Restaurant industry official T.J. Vonderwalt says the businesses he works with get a huge number of applications for every job. Seja Motopo Motau is a member of South Africa's parliament. He says education has been a major problem in South Africa's development. He notes that many blacks received a poor education under white minority rule. Apartheid officially ended in 1994. He says many people are university graduates, but they cannot get jobs where there is a need for skilled workers. This is because the education these graduates have is not enough to place them in jobs with high skill requirements. For VOA Learning English, I'm Laurel Bowman.
From VOA Learning English, this is the Economics Report. In South Africa, the rate of unemployment is about 25%. Some businesses and economists say South African labor laws are too restrictive. They say the rules are keeping the jobless rate so high. Business leaders are especially concerned about laws on hiring and firing workers. Here is one example. Simon Arcus dismissed an employee who stabbed another worker. The fired employee took the businessman to labor court. Mr. Arcus spent $7,000 in court costs before he reached a settlement with the worker. He says he never should have had to pay those costs. He says the incident also cost him and his workers time. Business owners like Simon Arcus believe it should be easier to dismiss workers. Now, owners must give an employee a warning in person and then 2 separate written warnings. Next comes a hearing where employees can defend their actions. Only after that can employees be fired. But fired workers can still appeal their dismissal in labor court. Lawyer Shamima Gaibi works with labor unions. She says workers need legal protections. She notes the case of striking mine workers in the town of Marikana. Police shot and killed 34 miners last year when a strike turned violent. Still, many people say labor laws are slowing growth. South Africa was rated next to last in hiring and firing practices in a report from the World Economic Forum. Lucy Holborn is with the South Africa Institute for Race Relations. She says the country's businesses are under pressure to help end poverty and inequality while creating jobs. For VOA Learning English, I'm Alex Villarreal.
I'm Carolyn Pursuti with the VOA Special English Economics Report. Americans have been watching the protests in the Middle East and North Africa, and closer to home. Workers in Wisconsin and now some other states have been protesting efforts to limit the negotiating power of government employees. Wisconsin's newly elected governor, Scott Walker, says limits on labor unions are needed to help cut a deficit in the state budget. The Republican governor proposes to end collective bargaining rights for most public employees, except on the issue of wages. The bill has led to big, noisy demonstrations that began in February in Madison, the state capital. The bill would not affect police or firefighters. They are barred from striking. But firefighter Malin Mitchell came to protest anyway. Democrats in the state Senate fled to the neighboring Midwestern state of Illinois. They want to prevent the Republican majority in the Wisconsin legislature from passing the bill, which they consider anti-union. Labor unions are a traditional base of support for the Democratic Party. Governor Walker says the state could have to start dismissing workers unless the Democrats return to debate what he calls a budget repair bill. Dennis Dresang is Professor Emeritus of Political Science at the University of Wisconsin. He says the modern history of the state helps explain the strong reaction. He said Wisconsin was the first state in the nation to establish the right of public employees to bargain collectively. So it is a real shock to a lot of people that these rights would be taken away. Collective bargaining rights differ from state to state. Lawmakers in Indiana, Michigan, and Ohio have also proposed limits on unions representing public employees. Critics say politicians are using state budget problems as an excuse for union busting in an effort to take away rights to organize. Unions have been shrinking in private industry. The Labor Department says only 7% of workers in the private sector now belong to one. But more than 1/3 of government workers hold union cards. Local governments are the most unionized. Over 42% of workers, like teachers, healthcare workers, and public safety employees, are union members. For VOA Special English, I'm Carolyn Pursuti. For more news and to tell us your thoughts about organized labor, go to voaspecialenglish.com.
This is the VOA Special English Economics Report. The chief executive who presented the latest and coolest electronics to the world has stepped down. Steve Jobs announced his resignation as head of Apple in a letter. He wrote, "I have always said if there ever came a day when I could no longer meet my duties and expectations as Apple's CEO, I would be the first to let you know. Unfortunately, that day has come." Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak started Apple Computer in 1976. The company sold a new kind of electronic device, the personal computer. Apple Computer grew more quickly than anyone could have imagined. In 1985, however, Steve Jobs resigned after disputes with managers who had been brought in to direct business operations. He soon started his own software company, Next, and bought a computer animation studio. The Pixar movie studio would go on to create movies like Toy Story and Finding Nemo. They are two of the most successful animated films ever made. Apple struggled during the 1990s. Many products failed. The company began losing money and its stock price sank. In 1997, Apple bought Next and brought back Steve Jobs. Apple used software developed at Next to create the Mac OS computer operating system. The next year, Apple became profitable, and a series of highly successful products followed. In 2001, Apple released the iPod, a digital music player. The iPhone arrived in 2007. Apple has also been a leader in online marketing. The iTunes Music Store sells songs for download. The App Store sells applications for computers and mobile devices. Steve Jobs is closely linked with the success of Apple. Investors were scared when he announced he had an operation for pancreatic cancer in 2004. His decision to leave comes as Apple continues to release winning products. Apple sold over 4.5 million iPads in the first 3 months of this year. The company holds the largest share of the growing tablet computer market. On August 9th, Apple first passed ExxonMobil Corporation to become the most valuable publicly traded company in the world. Since then, the two companies have traded the lead. For VOA Special English, I'm Alex Villarreal. You can learn English and stay informed every day from your computer or mobile device at voaspecialenglish.com. You can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, and iTunes at VOA Learning English.
From VOA Learning English, this is the Economics Report. Many Thais joined protests in Bangkok last year. They urged Prime Minister Yingluck Shinawatra to deal with the growing problem of corruption in their country. How much economic activity is lost to corruption is difficult to estimate. The University of the Thai Chamber of Commerce studied the issue not too long ago. The university found that more than 2% of all of the goods and services produced in Thailand or worth about $11 billion, will likely be lost to corruption this year. According to the researchers, many business people say they are paying more to Thai officials and politicians to win government contracts. Political economist Pasuk Panchaychit says there is evidence that officials are making progress in controlling low-level corruption. But, she says, the slowing world economy means growing competition for profitable deals with the government. Bandit Nichadawan is a former central bank official and president of the Thai Institute of Directors. He says corruption in Thailand appears to be more of a problem now than it was 10 years ago. And the problem affects more than Thailand. The American-based Center for International Policy says that more than $2.7 trillion in illegal funds left China between 2001 and 2010. The money left as a result of criminal financial deals, corruption, tax evasion, or other illegal activities. For Thailand, the amount was $64 billion during the same period. In 2003, the United Nations passed a convention against corruption, but observers say the fight against corruption needs to go beyond law enforcement. They say it must include non-governmental organizations and private industry groups. For VOA Learning English, I'm Laurel Bowman. From VOA Learning English, this is the Economics Report in Special English. Many children first learn the value of money by receiving an allowance. The purpose of an allowance is to teach children about money. Children can learn how to manage money, especially at an early age when financial mistakes are not very costly. The amount of money that parents give to their children to spend as they wish differs from family to family. Timing is another consideration. Some children get a weekly allowance. Others get a monthly allowance. Parents should make clear what, if anything, the child is expected to pay for with the money. At first, young children may spend all of their allowance soon after they receive it. If they do this, they will learn the hard way that spending must be done within a budget. Parents are usually advised not to offer more money until the next allowance. The object is to show young people that a budget demands choices between spending and saving. Older children may be responsible enough to save money for larger costs like clothing or electronics. Many people who have written on the subject of allowances say it is not a good idea to pay your child for work around the home. These jobs are a normal part of family life. Paying children to do extra work around the house, however, can be useful. It can even provide an understanding of how a business works. Allowances give children a chance to experience the things they can do with money. They can share it in the form of gifts or giving to a good cause. They can spend it by buying things that they want, or they can save and maybe even invest it. Saving helps children understand that costly goals require sacrifice. You have to cut costs and plan for the future. For VOA Learning English, I'm Laurel Bowman.
From VOA Learning English, this is the Economics Report in Special English. 5 nations held the 5th BRICS Summit at the end of March in Durban, South Africa. The 5 BRICS nations are Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. For years, these nations have said they do not have a strong voice in world events. All 5 countries have strong economies, but none has been asked to lead the International Monetary Fund or the World Bank. India, Brazil, and South Africa have all campaigned without success for a permanent seat on the United Nations Security Council. Anil Suklal is South Africa's ambassador to the BRICS group. He says the group can overcome historical imbalances by giving each nation power over a proposed development bank. The bank would be collectively owned by all the BRICS countries. Emilio Pera is with Ernst & Young Business Advisory Services. He says a development bank is a good idea for financing public works projects and strengthening cooperation between the BRICS nations. A report from South Africa's Standard Bank says each nation is expected to donate $10 billion for the bank. China's economy alone is bigger than that of the 4 other countries combined. For China, $10 billion is not a lot of money. But for South Africa, it represents almost half of the country's education budget. At the IMF and the World Bank, members donate money based on the size of their economy. Standard Bank's Simon Fremantle says it could be a long time before the bank is launched. He thinks the bank has a long process through which it still has to travel in order to reach the point where it can extend loans. For VOA Learning English, I'm Carolyn Prasuti.